All right, so we are continuing. Well, it's continuing. I get caught in ruts. Sorry about that. We're starting a new series. It's called Generosity. What does this mean? All right, so I got to ask the Lutherans in the room, which should be a lot of you in this room, especially. Like and if you're part of the Bible study, you're not allowed to answer because we were talking about this week. Like when you hear the phrase, "What does this mean?" What do you think of? In like a Lutheran sense. Do what? Catechism. Good job. Good job. Catechism. Like it's right there. So I have to tell you guys, you're doing better than they did in that Bible study. Like that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying on that. So that's the whole thing. So this is a small catechism, which I got to take issue for just a second. Have you noticed how massive the small catechisms are now? They didn't add content. I think they're like, oh, this is like become almost like a ceremonial book. I mean, like this, the paper is thick in this. You can't even see through it. But in the catechism, it's like the first commandment. It says, oh, that's not the commandment. That's the. You think I would know what I was doing here. Like that's, it's like you should have no other gods. And it says, what does this mean? That we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things, right? Like so that what does this mean really gets us in there. And this is a stewardship sermon series. A stewardship sermon series. We're talking about our money. We're talking about generosity. We're talking about all those things. And what I've noticed is that oftentimes with these conversations about money end up kind of being all about the law, right? And when we look at the 10 Commandments, the first part of the small catechism, like we look at these 10 Commandments, it's like, oh no, like God is just angry, and if I break some of these commandments, like he's gonna like smite me or something like that. Or we use it as like a competition between other people. It's like, I may be bad, but I haven't broken the 7th one, right? Or the 6th one, it's like that, or the 5th one, at least I haven't killed anybody, right? Like, so like we could do this comparison thing, but it's all just seems to be law coming down. And the way that I see how God has created the world is that he's created abundance in it. Our problem is that we try to divide that abundance up. We try to claim some for ourselves, and we're like, there's not enough. And so we try to split that abundance all apart. So this sermon series is all about the 10 Commandments, but it's also about how God has put us in abundance, the abundance of the kingdom, and how he's worked all those things. So we're going to see how God's abundance is evidence in those 10 Commandments. So, all right, let's quiz you guys again. I just gave you the answer a little bit ago. This is really just a quiz on how good you can remember. What's the first commandment? That was a lot of different answers, but I think you guys all got it. that was a lot. Like there was no unified thing going on. I just heard noise, but like it's basically like have no other gods before me, right? Like that's the first one over there. And the what does this mean is that we should fear, love, and trust God above all things. What I think is going on in this commandment is that this commandment, the first one here, is the one commandment that kind of rules the rest of them. Because I think there's two things. Like, A, there are other gods in our lives. We're going to talk about one of them. You can probably guess what that one is. Money. And so like that's like, so we have these other gods in our lives, but we also like to create gods in ourselves, right? Like we want to make gods out of our own selves. And I think we break this first one as we break the rest of them, right? Like that's kind of how we see this going forward here, that this is the one that rules them all. Now, we got to talk about Luther's large catechism. If there was ever a document that changed my faith, it's this one right here. It's this one. I didn't bring mine up. This is a newer one. I call this the pink catechism. It's actually red, but mine is pink because it sat in my car for years and has just been bleached out, like all those things. This book is incredible. Luther's large catechism is amazing. Like like I used to look at these 10 commandments in such just a strong law way. Like you better like get all this, but they are a pathway that we see Jesus and God's grace. We'll call that abundance in here. This is the newer version of it. This is the one you want, right? This is the one you want. This is the good translation. Because Luther wrote this stuff 500 years ago in German. I know some of you like to tell me you can speak German. No one in this room, huh? Good. Like all that stuff. So the translations are different. This one will make you fall asleep. This one will make you laugh. All right? Get this one. We have some of these for sale if you would like. They're like $15. And so if you want one, if you can't do $15, we can just give you one. But it's good. But in that, Luther has this definition for the catechism. And it says, you shall have no other gods, and this is how Luther defines it. To whatever you give your heart and entrust your being, I say that is really your God. And when you're reading the large catechism, and I encourage everyone to do that. Grab one. You can even find, it's free online. It's the boring translation, but it's free, right? Read through it. It's remarkable how fast Luther gets to what he calls mammon, which is which is quite the word to talk about our money and wealth, right? Like he calls it mammon. Does anyone in here use the word mammon in their everyday language? Like you don't go to Publix and they're like, how much mammon do I owe you? You don't do that. Like it's the mammon these days, inflation, right? No, but it's like mammon goes in here, and he says that mammon has become an idol, and he has a little test that you can tell that it's an idol in our own lives by how much anxiety and our blood pressure and how much thought goes into mammon or our money or our wealth, right? And it doesn't matter if we have a lot of it or a little of it. Like a lot of times we think of we get so worried about the other end of it, right? And then it just controls everything in us. You may have so much and you're worried about losing just a little bit. So you're tethered to your TD Ameritrade account, right? And constantly looking, and you just haven't looked in the last 3 weeks because it's all been anyway. But also if you don't have enough, you're like, I don't know how we're going to pay for all of this. And it all just becomes about kind of splitting up the abundance. It causes anxiety all around us. And what I've noticed is that how we view money or how we view all of these things, it can cause us, when we get anxiety, it can cause us to actually turn in on ourselves. It can cause us to be selfish. And cause us to push aside our neighbors. This is one of the things that I've realized in the kingdom of God, is that usually the stuff from God, the good stuff, right? The good news pushes us out into the world. Not as a command, it's like you better, but as I'm liberated, I'm freed, I can go out from here. Whereas our sin and all of that usually causes us to entrench in ourselves. And it makes me sad when I see people that come in the name of Jesus, but they're using it in a way to get people to curl in on each other, to curl in on all of this, to only think about ourselves. So I want to talk about the gospel lesson for just a little bit here. The gospel lesson today was fascinating. It's from Luke chapter 12. I wanted to read to you the entire chapter. But some people, Kevin, complained about length. And I was like, oh, all right, we can do whatever, that's so we cut it down. But right before our reading began, before the guy gets up and talks to Jesus is giving some warnings. And he says, be careful of the Pharisees. Be careful of those guys that walk around in white robes with flowers on them and talk about money in public, be careful of all, oh, dang, that's personal. And be careful of them, right? In other places in the Bible, the Pharisees, Jesus describes as people who devour widows' homes. who take from them. And we recognize these people today, right? It's not hard to see them, that they go around and it's not hard to turn on the TV and they're like, you got to put down that seed money, right? You got to put down those things. It's not hard to see that, whether it's preachers, politicians, doing all these things that will wrap the God language around stuff in order to benefit themselves. Right? Like it's over there. So Jesus is like, be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees. Right? Like watch out for that. Watch out for how they want to take all these things from it. But, and then he kind of goes into this whole persecution thing. And Jesus says something fascinating. He says, don't worry about them, the Pharisee type, right? Don't worry about them. Worry, if you're going to worry about something, worry about, and this is how the NIV translates it, worry about the God that can cast you into hell, into Gehenna specifically, right? Worry about that. And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, you never talk like this. Like over there, like worry about that. Worry about the God who holds your eternity in his hand, right? Don't worry about all those Pharisees and those people that are telling you that you got to do all these things and be this way and all that stuff, but worry about the God over there. And when that happens, it's like Jesus is juggling, and suddenly there's this ball about, you're telling me something to worry about? What's going on there? And then a guy walks up to Jesus. And the way, when I read this, I always have like a play going on in my head as I picture all these gospels. It's like a guy walks up to Jesus and he pushes his glasses up. Now, Jesus, like teacher, like tell my brother, he's not sharing with me. He's not splitting of the abundance of my father, right? Like tell him to divide the inheritance with me. It's an interesting thing. So we have like Jesus is talking about, beware of the Pharisees. And it's like, don't worry about them. If you are going to worry about something, worry about God and the one who can hold your eternity. And this guy comes up and is like, tell my brother to divide what is rightfully mine. Right? Like it seems odd. It seems out of character. It seems weird. But that is what is going on in this. So, and how Jesus handles this is amazing. If you remember the reading, he's like, who made me your lawyer to divide up your inheritance? It's not my job. Like, what are you doing? Like, why have you even brought this up to me? Like, and what we end up seeing is that Jesus tells this story, tells this parable about a rich guy who has all these fields and he has this bumper crop, and the guy's like, I've got too many problems. I just don't have anywhere to put all my money, right? Like it's basically what it is, which is a hilarious way to put it, right? The banks can't even hold all my money, right? So I know what I'll do. I'll just build bigger barns. I'll build bigger barns, and they will be so much bigger, and I can say to myself, I have laid up enough grain for years and years and years. I can take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, because everything is great, right? Like he's going over there. I can just build more and more and more to hold all these things. And then God says this to him. He goes, you fool. Now, there's multiple ways you could read this. You could be very judgmental, and it's like, you fool, Or it could be like, oh, you fool. I won't say which one I'm reading it as, but it's like, tonight, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? I think Jesus, in this story, is now referencing the father who has just died of this guy who wants to split his inheritance. And I think he's telling him, it's like, be careful that you don't just live this life of your father, right? Because I got to be honest with you, like the end of life, splitting up the inheritance is kind of difficult. We have implemented some changes around here because oftentimes when the second parent dies, the cops are outside because everyone's at their throats, right? The first parent dies, everyone's happy, which is a little weird, right? But when the second one, like everyone's at their throats, they're all worried, like need to split up our inheritance because that anxiety, all of a sudden, all that anxiety and the worry about the money comes and takes over us, right? Comes in and takes over us. And I think he's telling the story as a way of watch out. Watch out. Don't have anxiety over this. And Jesus then goes, remember the flowers. Like, I know you have anxiety about all these things, but remember the flowers. Like they don't toil or spin, yet Solomon in all of his wealth and splendor, which was his downfall, by the way, like wealth and splendor, was not adorned as well as one of those, right? And he says, consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn. All right, I have a beef with Jesus on this little part right here. I'm becoming an old man. You need to understand this. I have a bird feeder now that is squirrel proof after about a year of failing. All right, I've got over there, and I have a woodpecker that likes to like this is not the smartest bird that you've ever seen, which is very true, but he has a storeroom in a barn that I've discovered, that he stores his grain that he has pilfered from me in my generous abundance that I've given out of him, right? He stores it, and some of you have been to my house, some of you have heard, like, what's falling on my head? Like, when you go out of my guest bathroom, out into the outside door, the woodpecker stores it all in the door frame above there, so when you walk out there, like, it all falls on your head. Like, he does this whenever he's not pecking on my metal gutter, you know? Like that. That's like, it's not the smartest, not the brightest crayon in the box, the woodpecker, right? It's really going after that metal gutter at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not bitter about it. God's creation is wonderful. Like all that stuff. But like that's like how much, and all of us, remember that question that we had at the top? It's like, don't worry about those Pharisees and what they're doing. Instead, be worried about what God, like the one that can throw you into hell, the one that can throw you into Gehenna, into the trash dump, right? Like that's, worry about that. Look at what he says, but look how more valuable you are than those birds. Than that dumb woodpecker, right? That hammers on the metal gutter. How much more valuable are you? Don't worry about those Pharisees. Worry about what God thinks of you. And on the way, God thinks you're valuable. So much so that those wildflowers that are so beautiful, and sometimes I spray Roundup on those beautiful flowers because that's not the approved plant for my yard. Die, right? Here today and it's gone tomorrow, right? I pick them. Like, how dare you interrupt my beautiful yard? Like that's, it's so over there. And you see that God has put us into this abundance, that he has given it to us in that way. And I think that's what he's talking about in that. It's not this scary stuff, but he keeps orienting us to remembering God's abundance. All right, now that we've sat you in God's abundance, let's do another test. So we've got the first commandment, right? You should have no other gods before me. Let's filter out the Baptists from the Lutherans in the room. What's the second one? No name. Don't misuse the name of the Lord your God. Good job. The LWML president on that one, y'all. like that's. And then what's the third one? Remember the Sabbath day. Like that's you guys are doing good. You're doing good. Like I cannot declare a winner between first and second service on that. So you guys are consistent there. So we have the first 3 commandments all about our relationship to God and the world around us. You said no other gods, don't misuse the name of God, and remember the Sabbath day. And what I've seen is that all of these in their own way are pointing to the abundance of God. They're pointing to and helping us live a life in the midst of that abundance. I think the second one is actually a great example of this. Misuse the name of the Lord. Usually we have such a small definition of this. We're like, don't say, oh my God, right? Like, oh, he said it on Sunday. It's not what it's about. I think it's about all those slimy, grubby politicians out there, right? That are trying to trick us into voting for them by doing a slick verse, you know? Like, ooh, like I know the Bible, right? It's like those plumbers that put the fish symbol in the bottom corner of their business card, right? Now, if you have the fish symbol in the bottom corner of your business card, it's fine. Like listen, there's grace abounds. But why is that fish symbol in the bottom of that plumber's card? Is it using God's goodwill so that you will go, oh, he's maybe more honest than someone else? There's nothing indicating that. He just put a fish symbol on there. Is that not using God's name to enrich yourself, right? Is that not what that is? Like, and we can see that we do this in so many things. So how do you use God's name correctly then? If we don't use it to just enrich ourselves, well, we can offer blessings and forgiveness, but we can also just be good at our job. Now, there's a quote of Luther's that may not actually be a quote of Luther's. Like, no one actually knows. No one can find it, so it's just kind of attributed to Luther. But this quote that's attributed to Luther says, "What makes a good Christian shoemaker?" He goes, it's not someone that puts crosses on their shoes. That's not a good Christian shoemaker. Like that's not what a good Christian shoemaker is, one that makes good shoes, right? A good Christian plumber is one that does good plumbing, right? A good Christian anybody is one who just does the work and does it well. Because when you do your work well, when you're doing what you do well, you are adding, God, the system of that God has put into place is working, and you are actually bringing in more and more abundance into the creation. That you're using the time, talents, and abilities that God has given you to bring that abundance in there, right? And yes, you retirees, even though you don't get a paycheck from that right now, but in the works that you are doing through volunteering, through just being with your neighbors, doing all those things, you're using God's name that's written on your heart to bring that. And I love the last one, the Sabbath day. This is the most one of the days of abundance, because we usually view the Sabbath as something that you got to do. You got to go to church. Congratulations, everyone. You went to church. Right? Like that's how we usually view it. But think about this other way of viewing it. That God has created such a day, God has created a world, a creation filled with such abundance in his kingdom that we can afford to say, I'm fine. We can afford to say and not work and say, I'm fine. Luther, he describes the Sabbath day, the first definition that he describes to it is just a good old day to not do anything, to just rest your body, right? To not work. And then when we wrap up the Christian perspective as the body of Christ that we put in here, we say this simple thing. We say that we are able to gather together and celebrate that God has placed us in his rest. That God has made it to where we can breathe again. that we don't have to toil every day, that there is enough time to where we can say, there is enough, that I can rest, I can play with my kids, I can come together and be encouraged with the people around me. I can even have cookies in the back, right? Calories don't count on the Lord's day, right? I don't know, that's... But think about what the church did. The Sabbath used to be on Saturday, right? Our Seventh-day Adventist brothers and sisters and our Jewish brothers and sisters, they still have it on that day. But the church at large, like when they realized the cataclysmic change that happened with Jesus, that we see that he died to our own transgression, to our own death. Right? He died with our own sins on him and all of that. He died in the thing that I think we are most afraid of, right? He died in the midst of all that, but 3 days later, he rose again. And the death and the resurrection and the Sabbath of God is such a testament to the abundance of the creation that even the thing that we all, I think, are most scared of, death itself, that even in that turmoil, when God himself died to that, there was so much an abundance in the creation that he couldn't even stay dead. That 3 days later, he came out as a testament to the abundance in the creation, and that his resurrection becomes our resurrection. So even when great Aunt Susie or whoever may die, we may look forward to the day when the abundance becomes so clear that we all rise together with him, right? And on the Lord's Day, on the Sabbath day, the church moved it from Saturday to Sunday to say, our God is a God of abundance. So, in a world that just wants us all to be triggered by anxiety and all that, I want us to try to sit down in all of that and go, God has created a world of abundance. And that if the abundance was so big and so pervasive that even God, who placed all death onto him, can rise up out of it, then I can finally breathe. I'll be all right. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. Say a prayer. I invite you to stand for the prayer. We're doing this new thing. Please stand for the prayer. So God, may you bless and keep us all. Bless us. Take away the anxieties of our heart. Lord, take away our blood pressure when we see that the money changes, whether it goes up or down. Lord, take away all those things that we feel like we have to split your abundance. And Lord, give us your breath again, that we can see that your resurrection is our resurrection. Thank you, Jesus. And we'll sing our next song together.